we put that down. And the land was something that was really important to Aboriginal people. It was part of who they were. It was a part of their spirituality. And Aboriginal people once lived as one with the land. So while representations of Aboriginal people from around the globe have been that we were quite, what's the word I'm looking for here, Buffy?
Not traditional, no.
Not traditional, but, you know, of a...
Isolated. No.
That we weren't so civilised because of the way that we lived with the land. We didn't build buildings and things like that. But we had a very complex and unique system of working with the land where we kept the land intact. We still had agriculture, we still built dams, we still traded and had wonderful systems of running a wonderful civilization. We had our own governance, etc. But it was not seen by the Western world as being sophisticated, I suppose, when actual fact it was very sophisticated and very complex. And I think Australia being one of the harshest countries in the world to survive in, I think Aboriginal people did a really good job of surviving there for about 60,000 years. So the sun, the circle, the yellow circle is the sun. And the sun obviously is a giver of life and, you know,
yep.
And so that's pretty much the representation of that flag. So what I'm going to do, I think, if I haven't explained it properly, I'll give you a bit of like the history lesson, but then I'll go into why Kirakin does what it does. So come back, like, it's not going to be sad this entire time, I promise, when I talk about this. All right, so let's talk about colonisation. Unfortunately, I hate saying the word, tastes like a swear word in my mouth when I say the word colonisation, but it was something that happened to Indigenous Australians about 250 years ago. And I always like to make note that the Dutch actually came to Australia first, but noticed that or made note that the land was inhabited and decided to move on. Some of them stayed, some of them moved on. But it was the British that came in and had the biggest impact on us, as they did for many countries around the world. And unfortunately, the impact of that has seen Indigenous Australians and their communities lose quite a lot. Land was lost, there was social disintegration, and there were, which has led to years and years of generational trauma, which has been passed down. In saying this, like, 250 years ago actually wasn't that long ago. Like, I don't know, when was Spain established? Probably go back to stories like before Christ or something, you know, like when the Spanish were around, right? So your history here, or your written history, I suppose, is a lot longer here than Western history is in Australia. Which actually means that my father, now I don't consider myself a very old person, like I'm probably older than most of the room, but I don't consider myself a particularly old person. My father was born in the early 60s, and he was not counted as an Australian citizen or counted in the census to vote until 1967. So he was a few years old, or maybe around 10ish, maybe, I think he might have been, when he was included in that. So my dad's 60 something now, so he's not an old man by any means either, and was not even counted as Australian. So we're talking about a really fresh history here, in the sense of Aboriginal people and what they've been through in colonisation. So what did we lose in that? So land and territories, obviously Australia is a really rich country in the sense of minerals and resources. So we have a lot of mining, like a big mining industry, particularly in Western Australia as well. It's probably the engine for Australia in that sense. Our cultural practices, so it was illegal for a time for Aboriginal people to speak their language. to practice any of their customs, to sometimes associate with other Aboriginal people. There was a time my grandfather was actually not allowed into town without a permit. Him being able to associate with his family and work and balance that lifestyle was actually really, really hard work for him. Our social structures broke down, so there was a time, what we call now the stolen generation, where young Aboriginal people that were counted as, half European, were taken from their families and put into homes, I suppose, or orphanages, or what would you call them, stations, where they were sort of like raised by mostly nuns and those of religious people, and they were taught the Western ways. So the attempt, I guess, from the British was to breed out Aboriginal people from Australia, and slowly, I guess, get rid of any trace of that civilization ever being alive. Spiritual significance was lost, and this still happens today. So even in the last couple of years, we've had sacred sites, sites that are sacred to Aboriginal people that are being destroyed, particularly by the mining industry. So they're either knocked over or dug up or blown up, and this causes great trauma to those people living in those regions and those people that have significant ties culturally to those places. Autonomy and self-governance is one that I think is really relevant for Aboriginal people right now and recently. Just recently, Australia had a yes-no vote on whether Aboriginal people were to have a voice to Parliament. So right now, Australia is the only country in the entire world that does not have a treaty with its First Nations people, which means that Aboriginal people in Australia are not recognised as the first people of Australia, and therefore, unfortunately, do not have very much of a say in terms of what happens with our government when making decisions on issues that pertain to Indigenous people, which can be really hard and frustrating at times. That went to a vote. Unfortunately, a voice to Parliament was what we were voting for, and that would have been a group of Indigenous people that would have had the ability to advise those in Parliament on those issues. Unfortunately, Australia voted no to that voice, and so now we have to work even harder to see if we can try, before I die, I hope, to see a treaty in Australia for our people. So, identity and pride, and this is something that I think Kirikin has worked really hard to make sure that we are doing for our people and for our allies as well, to be able to identify and with pride, like who we are and what our culture is, but also for those around us to be able to wear a label like Kirikin with pride and the confidence to be able to speak as allies for Aboriginal people in Australia. Economic independence is another one, and that's what Kirikin Foundation is working really hard on at the moment, is building those Indigenous businesses, supporting them and helping them to find the networks and the platforms necessary to be able to essentially feed their families at the end of the day, but also build a bit of an economic structure around our businesses and our communities that will help us with some generational wealth, I guess. Family and community, legal rights and recognition, which I've already sort of gone through as well. So you can see that there was a whole lot that was lost throughout this time. Which brings us to our expressions, our songs and our art. There's something that Aboriginal people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years, as have other cultures, and it's always been something. I mean, you're all creatives in this room. You know how important this can be to our well-being and to our souls and to how we identify as individuals as well. Here we have a man playing the didgeridoo. Have you all heard of the didgeridoo? You know, and they blow it down and it makes that thundery sound.
Yes.
You know? That's the yiraki. We call it a yiraki back home, and that is that originated in the Northern Territory, so the northern part of Australia, and has been passed down through trade and such over thousands of years, and ended up being spread right across Australia in different cultures, as it is originally from the Northern Territory. Us in the south don't. Well, we respectfully still acknowledge it as that it's an instrument that does not belong to us, but has been
I'll turn it off.
been lent to us, and we use with permission of the traditional owners.
And traditionally, women aren't allowed to play the yidaki.
Yes, no. I've never touched it in my life.
Me neither.
My dad told me if I touched it, I wouldn't be able to have babies.
Yeah.
So I just never touched them. They're always around the house and stuff, but they were for the boys to play. And he was only trying to scare me off going near them,
Yeah.
sort of thing. So these are a couple of ideas on traditional art and what it looked like, the colours used. You can see there's a lot of dot painting. Dot painting is really traditional to the northern parts of Australia, whereas down south they probably use more lines and circles and things like that. But it's become a really big part of how we tell our stories now, and I guess that's why a program like this is so important to us spreading the word of Aboriginal Australia, our culture and what it means to us, is because fashion and art is the perfect medium to start a conversation, I guess. So it works seamlessly together, and I mean, I'd sing you a song, but you wouldn't like it. And now we're looking into contemporary art and what that looks like right now. Buffy, do you want to take this part for me, because I've got to run out to the bathroom really quickly.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about contemporary art because that's what I am. So here I'm at a show, this was the London show, so we did an exhibition there, and those designs behind were from contemporary artists as well. You can see a lot of the symbols in the artwork over here. They all represent and mean something, so Aboriginal art is about telling stories, and there's always a meaning and a purpose behind the artwork. So these U-shapes here, for example, represent people. And the way that it became a U-shape is like a bird's eye view. So if that was laying flat on the ground and somebody was sitting down with their legs crossed, that would be a person. Like you would be able to see their shape, and that's what that U-shape represents. And then these usually represent a fire or meeting place or a home. So with the Aboriginal art, so symbols have been used for thousands of years, and me personally as a contemporary artist, I've taken it and I produce artwork graphically now and digitally. So this is digital design, and I also do acrylic design as well. Any questions? Move to the next one. Okay. So those ones are more traditional and up north styles of art, and then you can see these are a bit more contemporary and more modern. And the ones behind over there as well, a bit more modern style. Okay, and then these designs on each of these garments, these are all produced by Kirikin. And you can see that the designs are contemporary again. So with the community inclusion, a lot of the behind the scenes and the models are all Aboriginal people. So Kirikin makes sure to employ and engage all Aboriginal people in all of the production. Yeah. So yeah, they're all wearing Kirikin garments. Yep, Shan.
Keep going.
All designed by Aboriginal people from all over Australia. I think that's pretty much it for that. Oh yeah, and this one's a little bit behind the scenes. So even behind the scenes, everyone that Kirikin tries to engage is an Aboriginal person. You can see here Naomi, so she's got a design,
Kamara.
Kamara is her fashion label, and that's a swimwear brand. And here they're lining up all the models. Yes. Yep.
Yep.
Kirikin the brand.
Okay. So, sorry that I had to start off with like a bit of a sad story, but understand, like, yeah, I guess you're starting to see why like Kirikin does what it does. And so Kirikin label was born through, or our founder, Amanda Healy. Amanda Healy is an amazing woman whose background is actually in engineering, and she owns an engineering business that contracts to mining companies in Australia. But she always had like a little bit of an inkling for fashion. I wanted to use art and express herself through fashion. So I think it was through a few conversations that she was having with people like in and around Australia, was that they wanted to be able to wear Indigenous art. They found it beautiful, they couldn't find it on any clothing, on any accessories, and they were looking for, you know, a brand, and they were asking Amanda, you know, do you know of anybody? And her answer was always, no, like I don't know anyone. So after years of procrastinating, she finally decided to actually start the label herself. And she not being an artist herself, but wanted to design the garments, decided that she would work with Indigenous artists from all over Australia. Like I said to you before, there are more than 250 different countries to be represented within Australia. So she's not quite there yet in finding representation from every single one of them, but Amanda, originally from New South Wales, has spent most of her time in Western Australia, has made sure that she works with artists from different parts of the country as much as she possibly can. And Buffy has been one of those artists. Those artists do their artwork on canvas, they can do them digitally, and Amanda gets them digitally printed like onto fabrics like silks and cashmeres and like behind. Amanda has spent some time in Paris at a fashion school there, where has she, you know, learnt the technical side of fashion, and for a woman in her 60s, I think she is the most amazing person I've ever met, and has given me so much hope that somebody of her age to start something completely new means the world, especially for other women, that it's never too late. So she didn't want it to be any clothing brand either. Luxury was a really big deal for her, so she wanted to be able to use really great quality materials, in that Indigenous Australia was always seen as, you know, we live in the bush and we eat bugs and kangaroos and, you know, all that sort of thing. So it was really important to her that she saw Kirikin be recognised as a brand that could be top tier, could be luxury. There is no reason in the world why an Aboriginal business couldn't be held up here with the best. So that is why Kirikin went down the road of luxury in the first place. She started with like scarves, silk neckties, bow ties, pocket squares, that sort of thing, and it's just evolved as time's gone on. It was a resort wear label, so it was mostly, and because Australia's a warm country, probably not that different from here, I guess, she liked to use like really light, soft flowing fabrics, and resort wear was really easy to make, I guess, at that time. the great thing about Kirikin Label is that because we work so closely with community, we get to get feedback a lot. So we get to hear what the community actually wants in the way of their garments. So it's evolved and grown over time. And now you'll see the latest collection has gone into formal wear. So a resort wear label has now moved into formal wear, because that was what Aboriginal people in particular, and those wanting to represent Aboriginal Australia, our allies, they wanted to have some formal wear that represented Indigenous Australia. So, and as a nod to like a bit of sustainability, I know the fashion world, we cop a lot in the way of polluting this earth, but most fashion labels are doing their best to contribute to, you know, a more sustainable future. And this formal wear in particular has gone into a higher sale or lease from Kirikin. So we have made, like, we have a smaller production line now, but more people can use them by hiring our dresses, rather than that way they're being used over and over again. And in actual fact, it makes us more money. So, so that's a bit about Kirikin. The latest collection, as I was pointing out before, is called the Yes Collection. So like I explained to you before, the yes-no vote, that, well, we were hoping for the yes vote, that was a nod to that. And while we were sorely disappointed, I love this quote from our founder, because it instills hope for us going forward. And it was named with a great wish for change and inclusion in our country, sadly not to be. Now it is yes to our future, to our work, to our resilience, and our want for change for the better. I'm still not sure how we can achieve that, but we will. And I think that's a testament to not only Amanda, but what she's created here in the sense of the label and the foundation going forward, is that, you know, we have been through some hardships, but as a people, and I'm sure, you know, you have people here in your own country as well that are always hoping for the best, and hoping for a better future. And I think that as small as Kirikin, doing as much work as we can on the ground to educate those around the world about us, and in turn us having that exchange with you to learn about your culture and your language and your people and your sense of style and fashion and what's important to you, really helps us grow better going forward as people of the world. So, do you want to do the next one for me, sis? That's a bit pixelated, that picture, isn't it? So, today, and sorry to those of you who cannot join us, Buffy is going to run a little bit of a workshop on Indigenous art. So this is your chance to have like a little bit of go at that, and we'll talk about symbolism and what that actually means in our artwork, because there is sort of the structure around symbolism and how that works for Aboriginal art. But we also want to talk about inspiration as well, and how you can take Indigenous art, take inspiration from it, without actually copying it, disrespecting it, or you know, being insensitive, I guess, towards the culture. So we want you all to have the opportunity to be a part of that in a safe place where we can work in small groups and have a conversation about, you know, how that actually works. I'm sure you as artists understand what inspiration means and how important it is not to, you know, be copying somebody else's work, and how furious you would be if somebody copied yours. So we'll have like a little bit of a chat about that. So, thank you all for listening so intently. Yeah, thank you. Does anyone have questions for Buffy and myself before we invite anyone else back? Yep. There's one over here. Oh, there's one.
Los que queréis preguntar, levantaros y os acerco lo más posible.
I just wanted to ask you about your creating process and how you translate, well, like, take all these indigenous culture and put it into the dresses and the designs, and that's it.
Okay. Well, it's not as easy as it sounds, put it that way. So we can all paint a picture, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it will print well on fabric, and it doesn't necessarily mean it will look great on a garment. So it has to be specific artworks that we can regenerate, I suppose, or repeat numerous times. So that's probably the number one thing, I guess, when looking at a piece of art that you want to print onto fabric.
So it'll be like a repeat pattern?
A repeat pattern, yeah. So you've got to be able to repeat it in order for it to work on fabric. And that way your fabric is more versatile, I guess, in the sense of like how you can use it and how you can shape it and things like that. So that's probably the number one thing, like, in the process. The next one is we have to love it. So Amanda is a huge collector of Indigenous art from around Australia and the world, actually, but mostly Indigenous Australian art. And it was just through her love for that you know, this idea sort of came about. So I guess that's that process in the way of like how we print onto garments. Everything's digitally printed as well. That's better for the environment that way. We're using less water, you know, that sort of stuff. We actually produce in India. Unfortunately, Australia does not have a big industry in the way of producing fabrics, and it's highly expensive. So we have to look to other countries to be able to support us with that. So that means lots of trips to India and making sure that, you know, everything's going well there, and that, of course, that, you know, the workers are being treated fairly, and all those processes, you know, sort of going into that. In terms of what the garment actually comes out as, what it looks like at the end of the process, that is completely up to whoever's designing it at that point. Amanda takes collaboration really seriously, so we all actually have a say in how the garments or how the finished product is going to end up. One of the women that works with us, she is Colombian, and she takes, I guess it also almost would be like a Spanish influence as well, like in terms of what she likes to see in Kirikan garments. So that shows that there's a lot of ruffles and things like that. This design in particular, this is actually Buffy's artwork, which she can explain to you more as, but Martha her name is, she actually designed the structure of the garment, and everything she does within Kirikan tends to have ruffles. That's her thing. And it's so she can salsa dance or something, I think.
Hi. Does your designs make like significant, like your arts made? Like she's playing that your arts are like meaning, have some meanings that can you translate that's your designs have significant or meanings that like your arts?
Yep. Do you want to explain yours, Buffy?
Yes. Okay, so this design is called Proud, and it's got the Aboriginal colours in it that were in the flag, so the black, red and yellow. So for me, when I did this design, it was about being proud of who you are as an Aboriginal person and wanting to wear and showcase your colours. And the design I did was just with the different circles and dots, but that's what that design meant, was being proud of who you are and wearing your colours. So that's how that translates into that dress.
Yeah.
Yep.
And circles, like in the way of symbolism for Aboriginal art, tend to mean community or family,
Yeah.
or a gathering place, or
Yeah.
a point of meeting. So that's why those circles were used in that.
Yeah.
These colours are representative of the Pilbara, which is a region in northern Western Australia. Throughout, it's representative of a Pilbara storm. So it's like a desert region sort of thing, and like when the storms come through the desert, it sort of like swirls up all these amazing colours of the sand and you know, the reflections from the sun and things like that. And that's
Lots of
what-
pinks and
that's
oranges.
what- yeah.
Yeah.
The wonderful thing about reusing, so this is the same artwork as this one, but you'll see that they're printed on different fabrics and they come up really differently.
Yeah.
The wonderful thing is that we can reuse the artwork over and over again, but printing it on another fabric means it comes up completely differently as well. And you'll know that like through, you know, production standards anyway, that when you do one production run, like the colours always come out really different to like the next one. So, but this is a way that we kind of get away with it, is like we make sure we use different fabrics. So if it is slightly different, the colouring, it doesn't actually matter because it's on a different fabric anyway, and it was always going to show up differently. But like with anything fashion, it's all trial and error, really. You figure out what works. Mostly you figure out what doesn't. But yeah, that has worked really well. And that story is really wonderful for us. For Aboriginal people, you know, our land was so important to us. So often you'll see Indigenous designers, when they do their artwork, or the colour palettes that they use are usually representative of like the colours of country as well.
Yeah.
So this one here, over here, was is about our waterways and that. That's why it's blue. And this one I can't actually remember.
That's Grevillea leaves.
Ah, the
I've got it.
Grevillea leaves.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
So
yeah,
I'm wearing it as a
Buffy's
scarf as well. Which is
wearing
such a
that
beautiful design. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that help to answer your question? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There was one more, I think, in the corner
Yeah. Yeah.
over here.
There you go. I think it's on.
Madam. I want to ask you, Buffy, what pushed you to make artwork based on traditional symbolism of Australia?
Good question.
Yeah, make her talk.
What pushed me? So for me, it was about my identity and wanting to express myself. And the best way that I do that is through art and through creating things, creating products, creating jewellery. So that's what motivates me. And I like being in nature as well, so I get my inspiration from going out on bushwalks and being on country. Yeah. That's it, I think.
Yeah. Buffy has also spent time with those around her community, those before her, I guess, in teaching her,
Yeah.
you know, like how traditional art sort of works as well, you know,
Yeah.
like that's how, like...
How I've learnt as well. Learning from my uncles and aunties sitting around the table. They were painting and I would be there watching them. So they shared stories with me as well about how to paint and what different symbols mean. Yeah.
And how you can interpret those into like your own stories as well as a contemporary
Yeah.
artist. So she's so modest, this one. Like I'm forever talking her up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything else before?
Can I ask one question?
Sure, Ambassador.
I was just wondering if you work with artists, Indigenous artists from all over Australia,
Mhm.
or whether you mainly focus in Western Australia? Because as you pointed out, some of the different techniques are quite
Yeah,
different across.
yeah.
It's
So
all over.
in actual fact, like in Western Australia, the techniques are different from like the north to the south.
Yeah.
Like even, you know, so and Western Australia is quite a big state, so I don't know how many Spains we could fit in WA. Like, what do
Yeah.
you think?
At least a couple.
At least a couple of Spains we could fit in Western Australia, in just Western Australia. But no, Kirikin works with artists from Northern Territory, from Queensland, from New South Wales, from Victoria. We don't have anyone from South Australia yet, but there is one from Tasmania that we are going to start working with. Mostly they're from Western Australia, yes, because that's our closest network of people, but we try really hard to spread that as much as possible so that we're getting as much representation as possible throughout.
And the
brand.
styles would be a little bit different in each
Yep.
region, but a lot of the symbols would be the same. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Um, okay. I'm curious as to why did you decide to use like digital print as the main like focus of the presentation from what I'm seeing instead of other type of, I don't know, maybe like embroidery or something like that, or why do you decide to use that as the main and pointing to the design? I don't know if I'm...
Yeah. I guess the main point of why we use digital printing is, one, it's an easier process. Two, it's basically all the artwork that we are taking is from canvas. So our only real option is to produce them digitally. But it's also much better for the environment for us to digitally print. Look, I won't say it's much better for the environment because fashion is the worst polluter in the world. But like we do our best to make small changes where we can in order to, you know, help the environment or be more sustainable. And digital printing uses less water, so those are mostly the reasons. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering to ask about what kind of impact has this brand in the people of ASEAN countries?
Of other countries?
Yeah. Of the ASEAN countries, like Australia, New Zealand, and yeah.
So Kirikin has quite a good footprint in Australia.
Yeah. How impact has this brand in the people from Australia and the other countries around Australia?
Around Australia.
Yeah.
I think it's had an amazing impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we are very proud to wear Kirikin garments and own that.
Yeah. I think so Kirikin's done very well in Australia. You know, we actually have more international customers than anywhere than in Australia though. It's almost become like a bit of a novelty item as well for tourists. So we find that the tourism industry works really, really well with a fashion brand like Kirikin. So tourists come to Australia and they want to take something home as a gift or as something significant that represents Australia, besides perhaps like a koala teddy bear. So this is something of like a luxury item that those can, you know, gift to their loved ones when they come back. It's easy to carry a scarf like in your luggage. So I think that we have like quite a significant input internationally. Southeast Asia tends to like us as much as we haven't actually done a lot of work on the ground in Southeast Asia. Like our customers seem to be where they're from. But Europe has actually surprisingly, and I guess that's why we're here as well, Europe has really taken on Kirikan and are interested to know like what we are doing and where we're taking our brand and the stories behind our brand as well, which is really hopeful for us. So in recent times the Middle East has been really interested in what we're doing as well, and I think the scarves and the ability to be able to layer most of our fabrics, especially within our resort wear, because we can layer all of those fabrics really beautifully. That seems to work for the Middle Eastern market. So they've shown some interest in us in recent times as well. So we're exploring that at the moment, what that's going to look like.
The last question, please.
Hello, I have a question about the Curriculum Foundation, not the label. And in order to know how important is your divulgative work, so in the institutional education or the history books, do you learn about the indigenous history, or is something that is banned from the school?
It's not banned from schools, put it that way, but it's not in the Australian curriculum for schools.
Okay.
So while they touch on it in the curriculum, it is actually up to each individual teacher in each individual classroom to know about Aboriginal history in order to teach it to their students. Our languages aren't taught in schools. In fact, I think it's Italian that might be the most taught language in Australian schools.
So, do you say which language?
Italian.
Italian.
Doesn't make sense, right?
No.
You would think that, so in my head, you would teach Indigenous languages first, but it's really hard because they weren't written languages either. So we've got to get all those down. And because of the history that we've had with Stolen Generation and there was genocide, all those horrible things, we haven't been able to get all of those languages down on paper just yet. So we're working on it. But you would think that like Australia, our closest neighbour's Indonesia, right? We might learn Indonesian. Or we might learn Mandarin, being that like our relationship with China or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't make any real sense. Unfortunately, in Australia, most of us speak one language, English, and not very well.
That's important for me. I don't know if you heard me, because I'm from, I don't know if you know the Canary Island in Spain. Do you know about it? We are a land, we are 8th island. Now we are next to Africa, and we get colonized. We get in the 16th centuries, and we don't get any knowledge about where from. We are from Aboriginals from the Western Africa, but we lost all of our culture. We don't learn it in the school. We don't learn about anything about that, where we came from. So Australia is really, really big, and it's most recent in the 18th century. I think it was the colonization of Australia, 18th century. So I'm glad that you have a little bit of knowledge from your grandfathers or from everything like that. It's
We are grateful.
very inspirational. I don't know what you work, what you do. With the Curriculum Foundation.
Thank you for empathising, and unfortunately, yes, it is a story that is very well known by many countries around the world, thanks to colonisation. But I think we're moving to better places, like soon. I think we're all growing to have a much better understanding of each other, aren't we? And this is cool, like that we can even have this conversation, right? Like based around like some old lady made a dress, and now we get to talk about this. Don't tell her I said that.
Bueno, yo creo que si queréis seguir haciendo preguntas, pero es que hay un taller. Espera, ¿me estáis oyendo? ¿Ahora? Sí, que ya sé que si queréis seguir haciendo preguntas, pero es que hay un taller ahora. Y entonces yo creo que en el taller vais a poder seguir haciendo muchas preguntas y aprovecháis para todo lo que tengáis que decirles. Vosotros vais a estar en el taller precisamente y para hacerlo. Bueno, muchísimas gracias a la embajadora de Australia, muchísimas gracias a todos vosotros, muchísimas gracias porque maravilloso. It's a wonderful day. Bueno, realmente es un día muy bonito para todos hoy. Ahora, los que vais a hacer el taller, os quedáis aquí y colocáis las mesas que faltan para hacer aquí el taller. Mientras que montáis las mesas, nosotras vamos a tomar algo. ¿Vale? Vale, ¿bien? A ver. Tenemos una copita de cava. La embajadora se va a ir. Vale. Bueno, pues, pero nosotras sí, ¿no? Es que tenemos una copita de cava y una de vino. Por lo menos algo. ¿Qué tal, Cuquita? Vamos a esperar venir a Vamos a preguntar. No sé si esto lo necesitáis, era para el taller. No, quédatelo. ¿Necesitas? No, vamos a ella. Tengo que dar a... Porque Cristina no está... Vale, yo tengo más, tú no te preocupes. El ramo para ella. El ramo, por favor.